Hey, welcome to the final class of the essential. Oh my gosh, I can't believe we're down to the last class. Shout out to anyone who's been rocking with us the whole 4 weeks. I can't even keep track of time, but so excited about this class. You guys are in for a really good session. For those who have been here before, if you know the drill, your name and your location in the chat. We always like to see where people are tuning in from. Let us know if this is your first class or your second or third, or if you've been the whole time, if you caught every class or replay sessions, let us know as well in the chat, and we'll get started in just a second. Hey, Danielle from Instabook. Shout out to Danielle, who's one of our previous speakers. Amira in Kentucky. Hello.
Yeah, excited to have everyone. Layla in New York.
So good to see you in here.
And
this is your first class, which means you have some homework to do. I gotta replay this past sessions. Toronto, DC, Brooklyn, coming back for another class. Welcome, welcome. Bulgaria, welcome. Super exciting. Kansas, awesome. I grew up in Kansas. Peru, hello, welcome. We'll get started in just a second, everyone.
All right, well, what do you think, Polly? Should we do this?
Let's do this, because I know there's a lot of information to unpack here.
Sounds good. Yeah, and people can, as usual, people can catch it later if they miss it now. All of these are recorded and available usually within a day or so of when we do the class. So hi everyone, and welcome to the last essentials of the year. So we've done 10 classes this year, which is wild, and so super excited to close it out with Olivier and Jehan. So I'm Peter DeCampo. I am one of the co-founders of the Everyday Projects.
And I'm Polly. I'm the founder of Black Women Photographers.
And now I've got to figure out how to move slides. You'd think I would have all of this down by now.
It's okay.
Why are the slides not moving? There we go. A little bit about us.
Yes, so as mentioned, all of these sessions have been recorded from season 1 up till now. So you can go to our respective websites, everydayprojects.org/webinars, blackwomenphotographers.com, and replay the sessions. Great news, thanks to the generosity of our partners, these sessions will be recorded and translated in English, French, and Spanish. So if you are, if that's one of your native languages like French and Spanish, you'll soon be able to see the recording in those subtitles. So stay tuned for that. If you follow our pages, you'll be notified on social. You'll see our posts. You won't miss it and when those are available in those different languages.
And of course, these are free classes. None of you paid anything to be here, but if you've been following Black Women Photographers for the last, year, 15 months, 16 months since you all started, and Polly and her colleagues have just accomplished a lot of incredible stuff. So if it is possible for you to drop a $5 donation or more, any amount helps, to Black Women Photographers, we would really appreciate that, and that helps them continue their work. There's a couple options there for Venmo and Cash App, and we can also drop the link to their donation page in the chat.
And one of the things that I'm very excited of, to accomplish this year is their first annual grant fund. This one is in partnership with Nikon Incorporated. So if you are tuning in and you are a Black woman or a Black non-binary photographer from anywhere in the world and you want to apply for our funding, you can. The deadline is tomorrow. So do not wait. I know it's easy to procrastinate. I've seen a lot of entries today, but do not wait, because if you wait, you have to think about time zones and oh my God, and that. Don't worry about that. If you apply early, you don't have to worry about what time zone is this in. Just apply early. You can go to our previous sessions, like Danielle's in the chat, and she has done an excellent presentation for us about grants and best practices and how she's utilized her personal projects and her work to receive funding. Go to our sites, watch that session for inspiration, for advice, or any of the numerous, subjects like Yagazi or whoever, and get that information and context. So do not miss out. That deadline is tomorrow.
Right. And we also wanted to shout out the Everyday Projects podcast, Repicture. New episodes have been dropping on Wednesdays, which means one came out today. This week's is on the mental health challenges of being a visual journalist, of doing this work. Patrick Baz and Tom Sate talk about they talk very openly and genuinely about their sort of own personal struggles while doing this work. And so it's something that I think a lot of people can learn from. Previous episodes have been on sexual harassment in the industry, issues of representation, and who gets to tell the story of communities and so on. So subscribe to that wherever you get your podcasts. This season of The Essentials is made in partnership with Africa No Filter, Pulitzer Center, Photo Wings, and ACOS Alliance. And we also wanted to thank the regular supporters of the Everyday Projects, Code for Africa, and Open Society Foundation's Culture and Art. And I also want to shout out, and I'll throw this stuff in the chat as well, Pulitzer Center, along with our friends at Diversify, have a grant open right now the Eyewitness Photojournalism Grant. These are $2,000 grants. I will drop all the info for that in the chat. And our friends at Photo Wings, if you guys have been enjoying these videos, Photo Wings, their website just has this amazing archive of interviews with photographers through which you can learn all kinds of things on many subjects in this industry. So I'll drop that link as well. And I think that is it from us in terms of bookkeeping. So now we will turn it over to Jehan and Olivier to introduce themselves and start the class. So take it away, guys.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Olivier Laurent. I'm the international photo editor at the Washington Post with a particular emphasis on Africa, Middle East, Asia, and France. My colleague, Chloe Coleman at the Post, takes care of the other region in the world. And I've been at the Post for 4 years now. I was at Time Magazine before that. And I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jehan Jillani. I currently work as a visuals editor at The Atlantic. And before that, I worked at The Guardian US as their lead picture and visuals editor. I have also worked at National Geographic and The New Yorker. I grew up in Islamabad, Pakistan, and I'm currently based in Brooklyn, New York. I have been a big fan of Everyday Projects for a long time now, and I am excited to be here.
Excellent. And so before we get started on the topic at hand, I just wanted to say that Jehan and I want this to be a sort of organic conversation. So you're able to ask questions in the Q&A form at the bottom of Zoom, of your Zoom window. Don't hesitate. If you hear us talk about something and you have a question about that particular subject, Peter and Polly will jump in with your question. You don't have to wait until the end of the session to ask your question. If there's a particular topic that we are addressing right now that you want to jump in on with some more details, questions, anything like this, go for it. we'll be also looking at those questions in the form. So I thought we would, like Jen and I thought we would start with what a photography editor actually does in a newsroom. And that's like one of the big misunderstanding is sometimes in the relationship between photographer and photo editors about what is the actual role of a photo editor in a newsroom and what kind of power do they have. For a photographer, the only point of access to a newspaper is a photo editor, but it doesn't mean that once, like in the newsroom, that photo editor is the only person that is involved with the story. So one of the things, like, you know, like we can talk about is it's a different way of getting an assignment in a news organization. So, you know, like when you're pitching a story, when you have a project, when you've done something that you want to see published, you reach out to the photo editor. After that happens, if the photo editor is interested, this is not the end of the road, in the sense that, like, that photo editor still has to convince a lot of people in his or her newsroom. So we're talking about the fact that, like, let's say I'm going to use the example of some of my regions. If I have a photographer that, like, is in Kenya and comes to me with a story about Kenya, I then need to talk to the Africa editor. That's the person who takes care of the text side of things of that region. Often that editor will have a talk with the correspondent who is based in Nairobi, for example, or responsible for Kenya. They will discuss if it fits with their plans, their reporting plans, stories, ideas that they had before that they want to develop, or like things that they see coming and that are relevant to the publication. In my case, like the Washington Post, like we're a daily newspaper. Like a lot of what we do is based on daily news. It's based on what's happening right now. There's of course, like, you know, a lot of articles that like go deeper and like are more long-term, but the ratio of daily versus what we call more feature or enterprise stories is, you know, like really like balanced on the side of daily. So once that like, you know, we get the green light of the writer and the editor of the region, doesn't stop there. Like they also need the green light of the foreign editor, which is like the guy responsible for the overall desk. And I'm using guy because at the Washington Post, it's a guy. And then beyond that, like if the story is going to be a very visual one, and that's where like it becomes even more tricky. Let's say you want to create a very nice presentation for that story, for those photographs. Then you need to get the design and the graphic department on board as well. So we're talking again, like negotiation of like on time, like the design department will have to put a designer full time on that project for a certain amount of time, which means taking that designer away from other projects. So you get that, like you just wanted to give a sense of all of the layers of red tape, in a sense, that come on top of just that photo editor and photographer's relationship. You know, like Jehan and I would love to have the power to say, yes, and we're going to make it happen, in a sense of like the snap of a finger, and then suddenly everyone that's involved in a newsroom comes behind us and say, yes, let's do it. But it's often a lot of negotiation, a large struggle that a lot of photo editors have to deal with, no matter the publication.
Yeah, so I think one way to think about it is it's something that Chloe Coleman, who's Olivier's colleague, has spoken about a bit as well, is like, we are your biggest allies in the newsroom. We are the ones who are responsible for making sure how your work aligns with the newsroom's vision, essentially. We are the ones who have to go bat for your images and your role in the story in various meetings and make the case repeatedly about why what you do matters, why we need to run a lot more of your photos, why you're the best person to tell this story. I mean, sometimes we succeed in this role, other times we don't, but it is, I can say this with confidence. I think we all feel like it's a big part of our role and like our job regardless. I think it's like important that we speak about this, because it takes away the animosity and anxiety that I think sometimes exists between photographers and photo editors, which is like, oh, like I don't know, we are on your side, we are your friends. And I think that's something which we want to establish early on in this conversation, which is, to Olivia's point about how much red tape there is, how many people you have to convince, like we're sort of your entry point that way.
It's like, that's a thing that I'd like to remember. We're all in this industry because there's a love of photography, and this is a love that we share with photographers. This is something where we really, we want to help photographers as much as possible. But if we find ourselves like in situations sometimes where we have to say no to photo project that we think would be amazing, but because like down the line there's a lot of like consideration that comes into play. And I'll use also an example. Sometimes a project is going to be way too expensive, and we know that if we say yes to that project, it means a lot of no's to a lot of other projects that are going to come later. And sometimes we have to make that decision as well.
Once again, just sharing this for context so you understand how it all works. But now I think we can focus, I can speak about this a little bit. It's like, how do you work with photo editors? So I think, everyday projects diversify. So many people have done lectures on how you get in front of photo editors. How do you start to pitch stories? But in this course, what we really want to focus on, I'm so sorry if you can hear the ambulances outside, it's New York. So I think we just really want to focus on what happens after you get your first assignment. So say you just got a call, you're feeling excited. What do you do now? How do you really essentially set yourself up for success for your first assignment for a client, say you've been wanting to work with for a long time? I would say, like, firstly, ask your editor and yourself some of these questions. Like, presumably your editor has already told you what the story is about and what deadline you'll need to file by. But in order to do a good job, you should also have an idea of like a couple of other things. Firstly, like, ask a little bit about what the tone of the piece is going to be if they haven't spoken about this already. For instance, if it's a reported feature on a certain town, do you know what angle the writer is planning on taking and what the writer or publication style generally is? Knowing this will help you better understand what you're being asked to do, and it will also make you sound like you're taking the assignment seriously as opposed to just responding to a prompt. Like, you are basically helping tell the story visually. So I think if you and the writer's on the same page, the earlier the better, the more successful this assignment will be in some ways. This is a very obvious one, but you should also always ask editors examples of like things from your pieces from your portfolio that they think were especially strong and that they would like you to sort of emulate. That way you'll understand what exactly they're looking from you stylistically and establish those expectations early on. And this is a much more practical concern, but if ask your editor if anything has been set up for the assignment already, or do they need you to do it? For example, does the person you're photographing know you're coming to photograph them? Will the writer be coming along with you, or is it just you? Is there a location set? Do you need to come earlier to scout if the location hasn't been set? Ideally, most editors should have this sorted out for you, but in newspapers, sometimes it can be a little bit busier. So I think just asking will sort of show that you're thinking through the logistics, and logistics are pretty big in photojournalism, so it can't hurt. So now, once you've sort of like asked your editor some of these questions and you have like a better idea of what their expectations are, it's now time for you to advocate for yourself. Now is the time to let them know what you need to make the assignment possible. So for example, like, let me run through a couple of instances just to give you an idea. So say your editors ask you to make 4 lit portraits in 2 hours, but not clarified if you need a budget for an assistant, or do you have money for lighting, rentals, etc. Ask. And if they don't have the budget, kindly adjust expectations and let them know what you can realistically deliver during that time frame. This doesn't need to be a hostile or confrontational conversation. Just remember, this is like a professional interaction where you're sort of establishing expectations early on before either party's disappointed. This can also extend into like more reportage type features. So say an editor calls you and it's like, I need you to go to this small town and make a photo essay. I'm sending you out for a day. Like, you need to let them know that in order to give them what they're imagining, you need either more time to build trust and access, or you'll need to go with someone who has already existing relationships. Or you can just be like, listen, you've given me a day, this is what you want. These are the 3 things that I can get. Is that okay? The last thing, I'm just sharing this because this happened to me yesterday. Like, sometimes you'll send out a photographer to photograph like an event that in your head is going to be super exciting and photogenic. And then it's not, right? So this happened to me yesterday where I sent a photographer out to sort of a conference, and I thought it was going to be like all of these techie bros and like really fun, quirky photos. The photographer calls me at noon yesterday and he's like, this is a bus. Like, it's really boring. There's no booths. It's really crowded. Access isn't great. And I really appreciated that he told me early on, because that way I was able to adjust the expectations of not only myself, but my boss and the person who had commissioned the story. And we were able to troubleshoot and sort of be like, all right, like pivot to something that we felt would be more successful. So instead of like more event photography, we were like, okay, let's make a tight portrait. Yep, it's NFT NYC. So anyways, yeah, that was just one example that I wanted to speak about. And I want to just quickly go over to Olivier, who has a good example about a photographer he worked with and how they spoke about style and communication.
And like, that's the, when you get a call for an assignment, when you get an email, a message, a call, often the photo editor will have done research about you already, will have a good sense of what type of photographer you are, what is your style, and how that style is going to apply to the story. They have a sort of vision in mind. And so, like if you have a very stark, very noticeable style, that photo editor has noticed that. And so when they're contacting you, and I'll use the example of a photographer I contacted not too long ago for a project where her style of photography was very impactful. There was something really, a sort of like saturation of colors that was very interesting. And I wanted to see brought to that story. Like, the photographer was on assignment for 3 days. I get the photos a couple of weeks later, and the photos look like normal reportage. It's the kind of thing that you expect, like in the pages of the Washington Post. But it's like that style that like attracted me to her photography wasn't there. So I asked the question after, like, what went wrong? Like, like I told you about like how I love your style, and I can't wait to see this in the story. But what you're sending me is usable, yes, but it's not what I expected, because like I had a certain vision of who you are as a photographer. And her answer was the fact that she didn't like to do that. She didn't have enough time. That like she reverted to something that was more traditional, because with the time period that she had, the 3 days of assignment that she had, she didn't feel that she could do what she usually does. And I told her, like, why didn't you call me or send me a message or like say this as you're on the assignment? On day one, you're realizing that the expectations are unrealistic for your particular style, and you just want to be open about this. You want to like to have that communication with the photo editor to say, like, I know you want me to do this, but in those 3 days, I'm not going to be able to do that. If you give me more time, or if it like possible, then we can then I can apply that style to the subject. Or if we reduce the amount of content needed for the story, like in this case, we're talking about like maybe there's 4 places to photograph. If we reduce it to 2 places, then I can apply that. But having that conversation as it happens is essential, and you shouldn't fear, as a sort of like it might make you feel that you're actually telling a photo editor that you're failing at the assignment. But what you're actually doing is that like you're informing the photo editor, you're setting expectation, and the photo editor is going to be thankful for that, because then it's much easier to adjust an assignment when it just started than when it's done and everything, like when the characters are done as well and like I moved on or something like this, and it's a lot more difficult to reorganize that shoot. And I think that's like a very important thing to remember. Not having that fear, it's not failure. It's really a sort of honesty that the photo editor is expecting. And go ahead, Peter.
Well, no, sorry, I don't want to finish your thought. There's a couple of questions that have come in that I'd love to put towards you, but if you were in mid-sentence, please continue.
Yeah, like I think like was like just one thing I wanted to say is that like what Jehan was saying, like we are your biggest ally, and if you don't see us as an ally, we cannot be that ally. So like really think about that, like I'm not saying that like all photo editors are going to react that way. Some like all human beings, some are not nice, but the very large majority love photographers, and they want to have these conversations, and they want to set photographers for success.
Cool. Yeah, I think that so often I think this is because it's a feeling of fear and like I've got to impress them and I've got to get another job later, but having that conversation early helps to ensure those kinds of relationships. So a couple questions have come in, and I don't want to totally throw you guys off your
Go for it.
your rhythm here. But so one person asks, would it be a good idea to ask the photo editor for an example of the piece if it's already written, or is asking for the tone good enough? And maybe built into that question is, are you usually assigning things when the piece is written, or is all of it sort of still in the works when the photography is assigned?
I can start off by answering this one. It can go both ways, to answer your question initially, Peter. Sometimes they will have a story pre-written and you'll just need to go make photos after, or you'll be going alongside the writer. So either of them is possible. I think that it doesn't hurt to ask the editor if they have a draft or an initial pitch that the writer gave. It shows that you're eager to learn more. And if they don't have, they don't have that, I think you can start off by asking for the tone. So yeah, both things go. I'm not sure what it works for with every publication. Obviously, some people might be more protective about their drafts. In all the places I've worked, I'm able to, share the draft and be like, this is for your eyes only. Don't share it with anyone. This is a rough draft. We're trusting you. With like not sharing this publicly. Usually I should add that we do it once the photographers agreed to the assignment.
Yeah, and like if we don't have a draft, we have at least a budget line. That's what we call the post, which is like a 3-sentence summary of what the story is going to be about, or a top, which is like the first 4 or 5 paragraphs of the story. So in a lot of in the majority of cases, we have something to share. And I would say, I would also reverse that question as well. Sometimes it's also good for the photographer to ask the question, is there a piece that I've done as a photographer that really inspired you? That really that you're looking at that story, that project that I did, and thinking, ooh, I want this applied to that story. So that's always something that a good way also to get a sense of what we're looking for, what it is about your work that attracted us to you and for that particular story.
Great. And another question is somewhat perhaps related to that. Were there instances where a photographer went above and beyond and really impressed you? So we've talked about, times where the communication could have been better, et cetera. But what happens that makes a photographer really impress you on assignment?
There's been a lot of like, and that's the best part of the job, is when you assign someone and they come back with a lot more than what you expected. Like I just had a photographer in South Sudan that just like I'm gonna have a very hard time to edit this work, not because like it's bad, but because it's so good, and then like there's so many images that are amazing that I'm just like, like I have to bring down 238 photos right now to 94 photos, and I know that I'm going to have to bring it down to 30 photos, and there's going to be 60 photos that are amazing that are just going to be like dumped because like not enough space to use them. And then you have like photographers who like you give them a story and they come back to you and say, actually I think the angle is not like the right angle. I've seen this, and that, and actually transform the story where even the writer comes back and like, oh my God, this is just like amazing. And that's like, when you have these instances, it's like, it makes your day.
Great. Go ahead.
No, I can, for this question about how a photographer has gone above and beyond, there's been so many instances where they exceed my expectations or are able to connect with the person they're photographing, or have these conversations with the people they're around and say like X down, and they're able to bring some sort of like soul and emotion and like actual like visual reporting to the story. So honestly, there's too many to name, but I will also add, this is like, if you're being paid for a day, don't do 3 days work. So even though you're thinking that like, this is how I'm going to exceed expectations, like, but they've given me a day, like a budget for a day, like don't do it for 3 days. I'm sure the editor will be thrilled, but that's setting a precedent of where your labor can be like used, like they'll be like, well, X photographer did this in a day, so why can't you do it in a day? And you're setting this precedence where like other people will not be able to be paid adequately for the work. So yes, you can exceed expectations by doing your research, by having the emotional intelligence to speak to people as if they're your equal, or having care for the story, or keeping your eyes visually like open and attentive to like different visual opportunities. But in terms of exceeding expectations and being like, you know what, it's okay, you can pay me less and I'll do like 3 times the amount of work. Like, I just want to put that out there. Don't do that. That's screwing yourself over and other photographers.
Yeah, that's a very important point.
Cool. So there's a couple more questions that are kind of go back to like pitching and getting their work in front of editors. Yeah. So maybe we should hold those to the end and let you guys kind of keep going. And then there's one question that just came in about how to receive images, RAW, JPEG, etc., and that's coming up. So
that's coming up. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Perfect. So the next topic is communication while you're on assignment, and I think this is an important one. What I do personally, and like it's not going to apply to every photo editor, but I think it goes back to the idea of having that initial conversation with the photo editor. Like you want to know, what they expect in terms of communication during the assignment from you, but you also want to tell them what you need in terms of communication. So I'll just use examples. I have photographers that I work with where, like when I've selected them, it's because there's a sort of trust of their work and trust that they're going to be able to do this assignment, to complete this assignment. And there's the idea of how much help, how much communication do you need from the photo editor? I have photographers who, like, when they're on assignment, like they won't send me a message for 2 days. Like they will be completely fine. They'll be completely like in terms of like they have it under control. They know what I want. They know what they want with this assignment, and they just do it. I have other photographers that require a sort of like every 2-3 hours or once a day, a sort of catch up, like I've done this, I've done that, I'm seeing this. Here's a couple of examples. Do you want to see this? And there's not a that one person is doing it right, the other one is not doing it right. You have to have a conversation with the photo editors about like what is going to be perfect for you to achieve that assignment. You know, of course, you don't want to, like, if the photo editor is like, stop it, I get it, you're doing it great, you don't need to message me. That's fine, stop messaging, unless you actually need that. Then you can explain, like, actually, I'll feel a lot better if I can message you a couple of times a day to tell you how things are going and just making sure that I'm doing this right. It's a relationship. There has to be give and take. There has to be a balance that is created. And when we are photo editors, we tend to, you know, to realize that, to have this, like, yeah, one of them, like, a photo editor, like, so photo editor I learned the most from Alice Gabriner, who used to work at Time Magazine. I watched her work with photographers, and this is when you really realize that a big part of the job of a photo editor is just to be listening. It's almost like you become a sort of psychologist for the photo editor, where you're there as a sort of intellectual and mental support for the photographer. And that's a normal trait. This is something that you should expect from a photo editor. Not every photo editor is able to do it. Again, like in general, not everyone is the same way. But if you're not able to communicate with the photo editor, there is that sort of disconnect that can be created, and it's like can become an issue for the assignment. But we're not mind readers. We don't know what you need. Until you tell us what you need, we're not going to be able to find out. So, like, again, like, there are conversation I have with photo editors where my WhatsApp is like constant, like it's a back and forth, and there's others where I don't hear from them from 2 days, and I know everything is fine, because if they weren't fine, they would be communicating with me. But you have to set these expectations as well, and it's very important. You know, like, we're again, it always goes back to the fact that we're your biggest ally. And, you know, like, it's like a friendship. You know, you have friends where, you know, like, they need to hear from their friends all the time, and others are just like, you know, like, gone for 3 months and completely be fine, and then come back and
Yeah, I mean, and also this can extend, you know, what Olivia is talking about obviously extends to like days-long assignments too, but it can also extend to like one day where you're making a portrait. So I had one photographer set up sort of a mini photo booth at the day of the climate march was happening in 2019. It was just a day-long assignment, but it was a risky one, right? Because he was setting up a photo booth in a crowded place. He was going to try to stop, you know, attendees to come in, get their portrait made, and interview them. And what the sort of communication we established early on was like, all right, Brian, you're going to get there, you're going to set up, you're going to send me a photo of what it looks like there, and then we're going to sort of troubleshoot whether this is working or not. I couldn't be there with him, but we were able to do, sorry, I'm just getting distracted by the questions. But yeah, we were able to troubleshoot in real time, even for a day-long assignment. Another thing that I wanted to add is that sometimes you can also agree with the photographer about how you would like to, or I guess in this case, you can communicate with the photo editor about how you would like to communicate early on in the assignment. So when you're about to go, be like, all right, like, editor, like, do you want me to touch base with you on WhatsApp at the end of each day? How does that sound? And that by that way, you both have an understanding of when you'll be providing each other with an update. And so it just, I think I'm someone who likes to have, like, be prepared about that. So I find that sort of early communication about how to communicate helpful.
and that's the thing, like, you know, you don't want to be on in the field, faced with a situation and you're afraid to contact your photo editor because like you're not sure if you're going to bother him or not or things like that. Like stop thinking that way. Like, and then the best way to stop thinking that way is to have that conversation from the start, where there's zero understanding of like, like if something comes up, or what do you prefer? Can I WhatsApp you, call you, send an email? What do you prefer? Have that conversation, and also mention what is your preferred type of communication. You're going to be the one in the field. Like we're behind a computer at a desk. We have pretty much access to everything, like from Slack to email to like WhatsApp, Signal, So like when you're in the field, know what is going to be the best way to communicate for you, and express that preference to the photo editor. I have conversation on messages, on WhatsApp, on email, or sometimes a call, and it's completely fine.
One thing that I want to speak about before we go into what to do once you're done with an assignment is do your research. I can't stress this enough for photographers. I think we sometimes end up going on autopilot where we're just responding to the prompt of what we're given. But do your research. You're a journalist. When you're given this assignment, you have to see as if you're providing the visual component of the story with a specific tone, with a specific point of view. So it only makes sense that you learn more about the story. So say if it's a profile, read the person's prior interviews that they've given in the press. Read what was written about them in like the New York Times the past 3 years. Even if it is a normal citizen, sometimes you can even just like look, okay, maybe like this sounds weird, but you can like look them up on LinkedIn and be like, okay, this is what they look like. Like, let me sort of think about like what sort of portrait will make sense. If it's a feature story on a specific town, do research on the area, look up its history and what currently are the biggest issues that are going on there. I think that once you will end up in that place, or when you're interacting with that person, you will feel grounded in some sort of like prior context, which will give you a lot more confidence to execute that job properly. And also personally to me, I really appreciate it when I'm working with someone who is engaging with what the assignment is intellectually, historically, and just like how it's going to be read in a publication. So that's something I like just really firmly believe in. The one other thing is like the research obviously the research doesn't have to revolve around the actual thing itself. It needs preparing for the day of the assignment too. So start thinking through what the logistics of the assignment will be. Like, have you checked the weather? What's it going to be like? Is it going to be cloudy? Have you prepared what to do when the light isn't great? How will you be getting there? Will you be driving with the writer? Have you already contacted the people beforehand that you'll be photographing? Like I said, most of these edits, like some editors have that prearranged, but it also doesn't hurt to ask in case that hasn't been communicated. So I think this is all just a matter of presenting yourself to the photographer and consequently to the rest of the editorial team that photography is a central component of the story and it requires a lot of preparation, research, both like in terms of reading, but also logistically. So I know this all sounds like a lot, but we bring this up because it's important ensuring that you provide the editor with the best product, which is far, far more important than any awkward or confrontational conversation you're going to have with someone you think is like powerful, or just being like, oh God, I don't want to ask for more money, or like, just do it because the outcome will be far more important than anything. And isn't that like what they say, which is like, I'm going to butcher this quote, but it's something like the success in your life is in direct proportion to the amount of awkward conversations you're able to have. So I think just be professional, don't be a jerk, but also like be able to advocate for yourself. Remember, it's just professional and you're a journalist.
I like that quote a lot because it's so true. Like when again, going back to we are your biggest ally in the newsroom, like it's a conversation about money. It's going to be awkward for you. It's going to be awkward for us as well, because like again, as a photo editor is not the person who like is setting the day rate at an organization. So day rate is set by a director of photography in consultation with the publisher. I'm talking not just like, like I'll take the example of the Washington Post. A day rate is not just like the executive editor, which is like the biggest person in the newsroom. No, it's also set by the publisher. So like there has to be a conversation between the director of photography, the executive editor, the finance department, and all this. So we are in a situation where we don't have that much control about that money aspect. And so we are going also to have like, if that conversation is also going to be awkward for us, but you need to have that conversation because you don't want to be in a situation as Jehan mentioned, where you do not have the financial means to actually do what you expected of you. Where like if you needed an assistant to make it like happen in a way that the photo editor is expecting, if you're not having that conversation, you're not going to be able to do it, or you're going to like hire someone and it's going to cut into your day rate. So like all of that has to be talked about. And like it's about doing the research, as Jehan mentioned, about scouting the location beforehand and knowing what you can do. So all these awkward conversations, much better to have them before the assignment than after the assignment.
And I think one thing that I would add to that, I know we're saying like advocate for yourself and like fight for what you need to make the assignment a success. But if there's a limited budget and the editor's like, listen, my hands are tied, this is what I have, then, and if you respect the editor, you respect the publication, and you do want to do the job well, then sort of try to come up with a solution with them. Be like, all right, like you don't have enough money for an assistant right now. I get that. Budgets are like tight everywhere. This is what I think I'll be able to successfully execute with the resources that I have. What do you think about it? And I think that makes it feel a lot more collaborative, which is also nice for the editor, who's just probably like, God, like, no, I can't give you more money. I'm sorry. I really do want to make this work with what I have. And so I think it's helpful to start approaching it as like, all right, we both clearly want the best thing for this assignment. We have limited resources. Let's be creative with what we can do about it. So don't be a diva and be like, ugh, like if you're not giving me $1,500 for this shoot, like I'm not taking it. Like you want to do the shoot, let's talk about how we can make it happen in $500. So there's a fine line, and basically it comes down to don't be a jerk. Like find a way to compromise, but also advocate for what you think will allow you to do your best work.
And what Jehan is mentioning has happened. I've had like photographers who's like, well, I'm not getting out of bed for and like in the tone that is being used, it become a sort of like belligerent tone. And it's like, okay, like maybe we can find a solution. Is there a way to make it work with the budget that we have? And like, yes, we're not going to get the top of the line for that, but is there a solution? And approaching a conversation with a solution in mind, with options in mind, always helps. Let's say like, as like Jehan mentioned, like portrait, here's a portrait with an assistant, and here's the result that you're going to get from my past work. And here's a portrait without an assistant, and here's the result that you're going to get. And present that. Sometimes you might be able to convince like the photo editors to like, okay, I'm just going to shift money from another project, from another photographer. Sorry, that other photographer. But in this case, it might be better spent there. Or sometimes it's like, you set up the expectation before the assignment and not after. You don't want to go to the photo editor and say, well, yeah, like result sucks, but that's like what I could do with that money. Like you want to have that conversation in advance of it. And remember, we will respect you for that. We're not going to see you as like, oh, that person is impossible to work with. No, we're going to like, that person is realistic. That person is telling me the truth. That person is being straightforward with me. And building that trust is important because that's how like you develop a relationship with a photo editor that like continues months and years down the line. So now we can get to something that's like something that's a little bit more technical. And I think there was a question on, do you prefer to receive images edited or unedited first? In what form, RAW or JPEG? And do you want us to select what we think are the strongest images, or you want to be the judge of that? So I would start with by saying that you want to ask those questions of photo editors at the beginning of the assignment, because every single publication is going to have a different kind of workflow and a different kind of expectation. You take Nat Geo, they are known for wanting to see every single photo that you shoot, even the one that are not like directly related. Like you shot like 60,000 photos, they want to see all 60,000 photos. I work at a newspaper. We're on a daily deadline often. I don't want to see 60,000 photos. I want to see like maybe 30 or 50 photos that are most representative of that particular story. You want to create a sense of, okay, here is 30, my selection of 30 that I think are the best, but I have more from different scenes if you want to see them. And offering that option so like the photo editor can come back to you with a request for more of that scene or this scene of this character, that's great. That's like shows like not only that you have a certain grasp of the story and of the characters and the people that you photograph, and that you are a sort of like you're offering options, and photo editors love options. Think about the fact that like, you know, the more options you give, the more possibilities we have in terms of how to present that story online and in print. So that's always good. RAW and JPEG, these are the kind of questions you want to ask the publication. I'm only JPEG because my like workflow is fast, but you know, as a publication, HDO again, like it's like they want to see RAW. Edited or unedited, if you send me a folder of at the Washington Post for a daily story of 200 unedited photos and unprocessed, like you're basically adding 2 or 3 hours of delay to my workflow. So this is again, ask the question at the beginning of the assignment. And then this is where I'll share my screen for a couple of things. And one of the aspects I wanted to really talk about is metadata as well. When you're on assignment, you're not just responsible for the visual component of the image. You're also responsible for the metadata that comes behind it. And metadata is, you know, it's not just like your copyright on the photos, but I'll say right away, like you'd be surprised the number of photographers that I have on assignments that don't even have their copyright in the metadata of their images. It's like, I'd say about 40% of photographers that I work with forget to put that in there. And then what we expect as well is a caption. And the caption is, especially for a news organization, is essential. And not just for the news organization, it's also essential for you. I'm going to share my screen and show a couple of like what we call their caption sheets. And the example I'm going to show right now are for the Washington Post. Each publication probably have a version of that that's different. So let me just share my screen and let me remove these images. There you go. So you should be seeing this Word document. It just shows the amount of information that a news organization is expecting. You have the caption, but you also have the location, city, state, country. We also have sometimes like a need for ISO countries code. Each country has that code. You have the object name, which is like often the slug for the assignment, the section that this assignment comes from. A, for example, here is for America. Let me zoom in because it might be a little bit slow, small. There you go. C section of the paper, like here we're looking at the food section, but for me it'd be foreign. So here I'd be it'd be an international. I'll put an I here. If the assignment, for example, is from Ivory Coast. and here at have form. Here you end up with your credit, and the copyright and the credit and the source, like in this case, you're an assignment for the Washington Post, so it's your name for the Washington Post. All of that information here, and there's a lot, is essential. So like when you send me a photo that doesn't have that information, I'm going to have to put it in. Someone has to do it. It's much better for the photo editor if the photographer has done it. And this is where we go back again into like the beginning of the assignment, the question that you should be asking. You should also be asking that question. What kind of metadata and information are you expecting for each photo? And like you can ask for the caption sheet. Again, most publications have one already. And if they don't have one, there are some essentials that just make sense. So location, that's an essential. So caption, that's an essential. And the copyright is an essential. But again, the number of photographers I work with that don't even have the copyright in their metadata is, for me, insane. And I'm talking it's not just young photographers that are just starting in this industry, but I've had photographers from the biggest agencies who do not have their copyright on their photos. And so what I was mentioning in terms of this is not just for the publication, because if you present that to me, I love you as a photographer, because you're taking away so much of my post-processing work. But this information is also going to help you. Let's say you're photographing Bill Gates, and it's like 2009, you have a photo of Bill Gates, and then Bill Gates divorced 12 years later. That you have this perfect photo of Bill Gates with his wife that would be excellent because it shows maybe he was making a face at her or she was making a face at him, and it'd be perfect for the divorce story. If you don't have metadata in your photos, and if you don't have that organizational skill, finding that photo again in your archive is going to be hell. If I don't have a caption that says Bill Gates with Melinda Gates and blah, blah, blah in this town or in this year, that's just going to make your search even more difficult. Then if you're using Lightroom, you just type Bill Gates and all the photos that had a caption with Bill Gates will come up. So this is an essential for publication, but it's also an essential for photographers. And again, so copyright, just for the matter that your photo is going to be copied. If your photo is going to be online, someone is going to copy it at some point, save it, republish it or something like that. And if your metadata is not attached to that photo, if your copyright is not attached to that photo, you're deciding to just throw that photo away, for anyone to take. Doesn't mean that people are not smart to how to remove metadata, but if you start by not putting it in there, you're already starting with an handicap. So one thing I want to mention about the caption, it's and I'll show an example that I have here. So let's take a photo like this one that was filed by one of our staff photographers, Salwan Georges. The format of the caption is, who are we seeing in this photo? Where are we seeing that person? And what that person is doing, where are we seeing them and when? So you have the Virginia candidate, Glenn Youngkin, that greets supporters on November 2nd in Chantilly, Virginia. It doesn't mean that this caption is what's going to appear on the website. And actually, when you look on the website, it's rewritten for the particular story that it attached, with that story in mind. But I know that at any point in the next years, months, years, days, whatever, if I'm looking for a candidate, a photo of him at that particular place, I will be able to do a search and get it right away. And that's invaluable for photo editors and for photographers. I'll use an example that was mentioned to me a long time ago when I was working at the British Journal of Photography. And it's a photo that we published then. When Lady Di and Prince Charles got married, there is one of the guests was, oh, I'm forgetting her name now. Like she married Prince Charles after. Someone help me.
Camilla?
Camilla, thank you.
Yeah.
There was, Camilla was one of the guests, and one photographer had the only photo of everyone in the assembly in the church, where Lady Di comes in and everyone is turning their head towards Lady Di, and only one person is looking at Charles, and that's Camilla. And that photo was like useless for, you know, years and years. But when they divorced, because of like, you know, like the love affair between Charles and Camilla, that photo became gold. And that photographer had a system in place to find that photo, to like be able to like to know who it was, who in the photo. Like he had tagged it with like Camilla is not like, you know, everyone is turning towards like Lady Di apart from this. And this is where like all of that information that is time consuming to create and to add to all of your photos comes with rewards in the end. What I'm showing
sorry, before you move from that screen, and speaking of how time consuming it is, I just want to interject really quickly to make one point for anyone who is looking at this and like has never seen this before or never does this. You know, you can find these fields in Lightroom, in Photoshop, in Photo Mechanic, whatever you're using. And just to speak to the time consuming nature of it, most of those fields, I mean, really all of them, you can just put in once and then apply to a selection of photos. So obviously, if you're doing one assignment and it's all in the same city and state and it all has the same object name, etc., and of course, things like your copyright, you're going to apply those. But even the caption, you can apply something general to the whole assignment, and then your work at the end is to go back and say, Princess Di, and you know, add the specific names of the person in the photo or whatever. But the overall is, it can, you know, it can be applied to the whole set. So
exactly, yeah, like and so you have like software like Photo Mechanic. This is what you're seeing right now. In Lightroom, you have like this like extension as well, where you can see IPTC information. In Photoshop, you're able to do that. And you know, like, okay, all of these software cost money, but they are also, and I'll just show quickly if I can. Here is on Wikipedia, digital image metadata editor, and basically every single IPTC that has a RDEW, or which is basically a read, edit, write, delete field, are software that allow you to get access to that EXIF data and to modify that IPTC and EXIF data. So, you know, like if you're not able to buy a license for Photo Mechanic, Lightroom, Photoshop, you're able to find something that like a free software that will be able to allow you to do that. And again, like as like Peter was mentioning, and let me show you directly here. Let's say you have these captions and all the information from this assignment, so location and all this. In Photo Mechanic, you're able to either copy it and then apply it to another photo, or you're even able to apply it to all of these photos, selecting them, and then you have this sort of apply metadata template to photos. And all in a couple of seconds, all of the photos will be populated with that metadata that you wrote once. Again, like I wanted to show this because I think it's a essential part of an assignment, and it's something that is always like can be forgotten about every once in a while by photographers. but it's like if you're missing captions, you've done half of the job. That's basically it. Oh, and yeah, one thing I wanted to add, always have contact information for the people that you photograph. Any kind of contact information. You never know. Maybe you misspell their names, or maybe the publication has a different naming format. You know, like Arabic names, for example. A French writer will write an Arabic name a very different way than an American writer. And so it's always good to be able to go back to that person to say, like, do I have it right? And if you don't have any contact information, then you have to ask the writer, then the writer has to ask the editor, or the editor has to ask the writer. And it just adds a lot of time consuming extra steps.
Or that photo just won't be published because we can't confirm the name.
Yeah. So number of times that the photo was supposed to go on A1, and because we didn't have enough information about that photo and the photographer didn't have a way to get that information quickly, that it got dropped from A1. It happens at least once a month at the post.
Thank you, Olivier, for going over that. He spoke about it far better than I could, but I want to just 100% second him on all of that. Captions are so important. It goes back to the thing that we were talking about earlier about how you are essentially representing the visual component of the story. You're a journalist. You want to show that you've done your research. Super, super important for newspapers, for magazines, and for your archive. So yeah, thank you for that, Olivier.
And then one thing I wanted to say, because there's Elsie had a good idea of, like, you know, walk around with a notebook and pen. That is excellent. And also some of the cameras today, or most of the cameras today, DSLR, also have a microphone note options where you're able, like, as soon as you've taken that photo, you're able to attach an audio file to that photo that has that the information. So I see a lot of event photographer, for example, that when they just photograph this person, they just go to that person, present their camera, say, can you say your name and contact details? And that file, that audio file, will be linked with that photo. So there's a lot of options that, like, allow you to get all of that information
in. Before we go over to the questions, I wanted us to briefly speak about, you know, sort of how do you build a sustainable career as a photographer? Obviously, there's been a lot more that people have spoken about this, but I do want to take the time to acknowledge that photojournalism and photography in general is a hard industry to make a living. And I do worry about that, especially from, like, an accessibility or entry point of view. You have to pay your bills, but this is your passion. So, you know, just a couple of things that came to mind. It's like, firstly, like, I think you have to be okay with diversifying your practice. And by this, I just mean, don't just rely on one stream of income. You know, be comfortable pitching to different clients, for instance. If you enjoy lighting or are technically, like, adept at it, don't be shy of doing commercial work or assisting. If you sort of, you know, get energy from being around people, then see if you could like event photography. Don't, you know, say that the New York Times is your only client. Try to see who else would be in the same market as them. And I think that helps, because in case one thing falls through, you have other stuff to rely on, because, you know, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So you have to just, like, balance it out. And I think Olivier had and I know you wanted to speak a little bit about, like, wildlife photography,
like,
for instance.
as just as an example, like, you know, like, if you're a wildlife photographer, Nat Geo is not the only publication. It might be your dream publication to work with, but if you limit yourself to that one publication, you're competing for, like, a very limited amount of assignment with a lot of other photographers that want that. You need to know your market. You need to know that in Germany, you have Geo magazine, and they have, like, 12 different, like, version of Geo over there. but there's also a version in France, or that there's like a more like upscale publication for the wildlife industry. Always think about the fact that like if there is a hobby, if there is an interest, there is likely to be organization publications dedicated solely to that hobby, that interest. And so you're not just targeting the New York Times, the Washington Post, Le Monde, and the Guardian. You should be targeting also the local papers, the local magazines, like the national magazines, like in England, but also in South Africa. Like, is there a wildlife magazine in South Africa that's very popular there? If you don't know and you're a wildlife photographer, then you're not doing actually your work as a business owner.
In addition to publications, there's also nonprofits or, like other organizations along those lines that once you're able to get in touch with your communications team, you might be able to get some work out of there. So I guess just be creative. And, there's so many resources out there that sort of speak to how you can diversify your practice. I know so many panels that Photoville has hosted. They sort of speak about this. There's Fuck Gatekeeping, which is just started. It's an Instagram account. I think they might have a website, I'm not sure. But they sort of like put it all out there about how do people make money? How do you advocate for your day rates? How do you diversify your client base? And just like, remember, the internet can be a hostile place, but it's also great in terms of just finding stuff that will help you build a community and build a sustainable career. So I just wanted to put that out there. And of course, Everyday Projects does a ton of good stuff.
And as Elsie mentioned, like it's always good to check out a newsstand. This is so true. And if you're traveling even for a holiday to like a foreign country, go to a newsstand. Look at the publications that country has. It is basically a source of information for your business. Buy a couple of those magazines, or like you have your iPhone, just photograph the masthead inside the magazine that has the names of all the people working there. Always think in creative way of how to know who's working where and for which publication and what publication exists out there. There are hundreds of websites that are just like about the love of publications. Go there. Like there's an Instagram account that's like shows the best magazine covers around the world. It's just a designer who loves the magazine covers and just puts like the one etc. there. That's a source of information to know what publication exists out there.
Great. This has been really, really wonderful. Do you guys have time to take a few questions now too?
We do.
All right, great. Let me remove your spotlights here so we're all here together again. And I guess I'll start, but Polly, feel free to jump in. So someone asked, Yasmina asked, what if you don't have a project to pitch to a photo editor, but would like them to see your portfolio and keep you in mind for assignments? How do you advice in general on getting in front of photo editors like yourselves?
I'd say like if we don't know that you exist, there's absolutely no way we're going to assign you. There's always that don't be afraid to cold email and just say, here's my work, here's what I do, what I like to do, and also very importantly, where you are. Like this is like, like, are you based in Kenya or are you in Seattle? If I know where you are, it's perfect. I'm able to like remember, okay, talk to this photographer, mention that they were in this country. Something is happening in that country right now. That's how you get this.
And occasionally it doesn't hurt to, in that cold email, share examples of work that this publication did that you thought was especially strong. And that way, I think it signals to the editors that you're sort of, keeping eyes on what they're doing too. And sort of makes the message a little bit more personal. I will say that it's editors are really busy, so they won't immediately get back to you, but you, like Olivier says, just put yourself out there and then see.
And the
And of
photo
course,
edit,
portfolio reviews. Sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead.
no, you're right. But in the photo editor that tells you that they answer every single email that they receive is lying. We get a lot of emails. It's just like, we wish we could answer all of them, but we tend to have that sort of memory sometimes where we received an email of someone saying that they were doing this kind of work in that kind of place. And when we suddenly need something, we remember, okay, someone emailed me, and we search our emails and we search and we try to find that again. It's essential. Like if you don't communicate, you're not helping.
Yeah,
yourself.
and also, portfolio reviews are pretty great in getting in front of editors, having that one-on-one time, making sure that you're on databases like Women Photograph, Diversify, and so many others that are out there. That's one way to put yourself out there as well. So.
And as Peter mentioned, and both our guests mentioned, this session wasn't about getting your work in front of photo editors more so. It was about you got the assignment and what do you do after that? Because we've held numerous sessions on, reaching out to photo editors, pitching to photo editors from this session, this season, and the past season, even just outside of that, at our respective organizations, we both hosted events on that. So please do go back and watch for that information.
Yeah, totally. I see a related question came in as well. How do you respectfully nudge an editor when you have sent something to them and you're waiting for a response? Or
yeah, there's so one thing to remember, and it says a lot that we have to say it sometimes, is to remember that photo editors are human beings just like you, that we're not perfect, that sometimes we want to answer and we forget. And then your email just is now down in the list of 500 emails that we received since you last sent it. So, you want to nudge them, but you want to you want to do it in a respectful manner. It was a sentence that says, I know you're very busy. It's the news been insane. Let me know if you had thought about the email I sent you last week. Just remember that.
If it's a timely topic that you sort of want to pitch a story on, you can also mention that in the email and just be like, I just wanted to circle back. This event is coming up. You have to trust that if the editor honestly wanted you, they would get back to you. If it's just a meeting, you can even circle back in a month. There's just, like Olivier says, there's human beings are emotionally intelligent ways of phrasing that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, guys. I wish we had ways besides email to I don't know, congregate and speak about ideas right now.
Yeah. Well, that was a lot of stuff coming in. Okay, so trying to keep it, like Polly said, more to the overall topic of this session. How about this? When are release forms needed on an assignment? Is that something you guys deal with, or being at an editorial or at editorial publications? Is that not really something that comes up much?
It comes up for any kind of sensitive stories. If it's a story about kids in a particular way, this is something that could be asked for. It's rare at the Washington Post that we have to have release forms, but it often helps, especially if the subject is sensitive. But again, it's one of the questions that you need to ask your photo editor at the beginning of the assignment, because each publication is going to have a different view on this.
Yeah, I know National Geographic requires release forms from everyone, and they sort of have an app, I'm pretty sure, that can be translated into multiple languages. So they have that, but at my job at The Guardian, we would only have releases reserved for minors. So each publication is different. Ask your editor early on for the assignment what their protocol is.
Great. I see a good question that was about the last topic you guys mentioned about diversifying your practice. Suggestions on how to keep your practice broad enough, but still maintain a strong enough sense of style or brand for editors to associate you with. Should photographers have two separate sites, like for editorial versus commercial and NGO? You know, for you guys finding photographers, is that helpful? Yeah, thoughts on that?
I can speak about this kind of quickly. I think you could totally have a separate section on your website that is broken down into editorial or commercial. And that way you can go over, I don't know, like if you shot for Apple or like a shoe brand or whatever, that will be under commercial. That'll be more of your lit stuff, like more bright colors. And editorial will sort of focus on how are you able to tell a story through photos, how can you advance a narrative? So yeah, if you can keep them separate, that's great too. I also know photographers who have separate websites for wedding photography or family photography, because sometimes that style is so different, and they can just have that too. So either if it works, it's about, I think, what feels genuine to you and how divergent perhaps your portfolio is. So if the event photography that you're doing is extremely different than your editorial work, maybe consider making it separate. If it's sort of, you know, you can sort of see an extension of the aesthetic in both, then you can keep it in one website.
And I just want to add something to this as well, in the sense that, like, you know, newspapers have a smaller budget than commercial entities. So know also what is the message that you're going to send to photo editor for an editorial organization if your website is solely commercial work. That tells me already that, like, you're used to a certain amount of money on an assignment that an editorial organization is never going to be able to meet. So there's this balance that you have to keep as well, where we understand that you do some commercial on the side, but you're an editorial photographer. But if you're a commercial photographer that does editorial on the side, there's this, like, sort of approaching the right balance is important, because you're sending a message. Yeah.
Really good point. Yeah.
This person asks, how do they send their story to an editor without sending all of it, but sending enough still?
So I'm going to take that question as, like, you've photographed that story on assignment, I'm guessing, and it just goes back to the fact that I was saying, like, you want to give enough images as the that tells a story, with the options of sending more if the photo editor wants to see more, and it works as well for a pitch.
If that person wants to reach out, I can send some examples of just what I've sent or what I've asked other photographers in BWP to send for consideration to get published. Let's move on. When seeking a photographer to shoot an assignment, are you hiring based on that who is in that area, or more on style? Like, if there's a photographer based in Chicago that you really like, will you hire them to work on something in a place that is not in a drivable distance?
I'd say it varies. So number one consideration for me at a daily paper will be who is in the area. And then it's like looking at, like, the list of who is in that area, what is the style that fits best with that story, or what is the person I think is the best for that story. So for me, it always starts with the area, and then it goes, like, to the, like, sort of, like, appropriateness of the visuals for the story. There are rare instances where, like, I will have to fly in someone from a different place because there's really something about that, like, that style, that photographer that is needed for that story, or is the identity of the photographer itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be twofold, right? For in a newspaper or a quick turnaround, I will start off by looking at people who are in that area, and then whose style or area of expertise sort of complements this story. So that's sort of my initial, I don't know, process for picking a photographer. I think that with assignments that you have a little bit more lead time on, you can maybe think about a person who has a really distinctive style, who could really bring life into this assignment. I think that's, I mean, of course, during the time of COVID, that's becoming like a lot more rare. I think you just want to make people travel less and keep it sort of safe for that reason too. And also, I think there's a like growing awareness that, similar to what Everyday Projects talks about, which is that, you know, when you're from that specific area, you're able to lend some expertise on the story. And I think that's finally, like, editors and newsrooms in general are learning the value of that.
Yes, I mentioned this in one of our sessions a long time ago. Sometimes it just depends on timing, like they said. And if you're going to be in a specific area, don't hesitate to reach and just say, hey, I'm going to be in this area. Like, for example, in the States, there was the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa race massacre. I'm in Norman, Oklahoma, which is about 2 hours away. And I emailed this editor at Reuters saying, hey, I'm only 2 hours away. I'm willing to go down and cover this anniversary. And I did that like a week and a half before, because I know that they already had things, you know, setting in stone already. Most news places already had something planned for that. But I just said, hey, I'm willing if you need an extra hand. And I was able to get assigned for that. So if you know you're going to be traveling, then that's put yourself out there. But most times it really just, like Jehan said, there's so many different factors. Let's see, going to another question. When is a photo release needed? Release forms in general for an assignment.
I think we answered that.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mark that as answered,
Okay.
but yeah.
Great. What do editors study in school?
I started as a financial journalist, so it's like you will get photo editors coming from very different background and careers. Some have been photographers and become photo editors.
And pro tip, LinkedIn is a great tool. If there's an editor that you like, you can even look these fine folks up on LinkedIn and look at their professional background if they're on LinkedIn and see their different track, because it really is a wide variety. Everybody has started somewhere completely different to end up where they're at. So just, you know, maybe do some creeping on LinkedIn or reach out or whatever.
Yeah, there's no one set path. I studied political science and studio art. Didn't even take one journalism class in college. Internships that way can also be a really helpful entry point.
I know we are really past time. And I want to be mindful of both of your guys' time. We all do, and because you guys have really just packed a lot of great information. As mentioned, this session has been recorded, so you can rewind, you can pause, and, you know, listen back for an answer. Is there any just like last words, thoughts, you know, advice? Or Peter, I don't know if you wanted to ask one more question, but I just want to be mindful of the time.
I'd say that, like, it all goes back that, like, we're your biggest ally in the newsroom, but we also have a lot of red tape around us and a lot of you know, like, going back to the email question, like, we have a lot of work all the time. We get a lot of emails, so just remember that, like, we're doing the best we can, and sometimes we fail, and that's completely normal.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think this was full of advice. These are all great reminders. And I hope this was also helpful for those of you sort of getting started in this industry, you know, and hearing all this for the first time. And that wraps up 10 classes in the essentials. We're going to be sending surveys out. We want to hear from all of you if these have been useful. We want to start plotting for next year. Do people want this all over again with new speakers and new topics? Can we do that as organizations? We hope so. But we're going to be planning the next steps. So so please, if you see those surveys, fill them out and let us know what worked and what didn't. But yeah, thank you so much, Olivier and Jehan. This was super useful. So
Thank you both. And I cannot stress enough, as Peter said, this was class 10. So if you missed all the other 9 classes, do go back and rewind, because your question most likely was already answered, especially if you're just dropping a question in the chat that we didn't get to. Like I see one on social media, we have a class on that. So do go back and rewind and replay. That will be your homework for the rest of the year, is to binge the Essential season 1 and 2, and go creep on, your favorite photo editors on LinkedIn and do your homework.
And your homework for the next 24 hours, if you're a Black woman photographer or Black non-binary photographer, is to apply for the Black Women Photographers Grant. So get those applications in. All right. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks so much for having us.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.